Now recently I've rewatched all of the James Bond films, and including the one that some people call a knockoff, some people don't consider it part of the franchise, but other people claim, yeah, it's one of the 25 James Bond films. So I'm going to cover all 25 of the James Bond films by saying a top 15 and a worst 10. So keep in mind, I do like pretty much all the James Bond films except for two. Only two James Bond films would get under 2 stars from me. So please bear that in mind. And bear in mind, this is just my opinion. Other people are going to have opposite opinions. That's fine. So yeah, I'm going to get the ball rolling with an already controversial pick for my number 15. It is Dr. No. Yes, it's a classic James Bond film. It is the first James Bond film. It showcases Sean Connery, shows exactly what he can do as James Bond, and sets the stage for what other James Bond films with Sean Connery are going to be like. It's a very classic James Bond, very good. It sets the rules. And honestly, a good spy movie that is very intelligent. Sean Connery is one of my favorite James Bonds, maybe my favorite, tied with Daniel Craig, because for him, he is sort of the classic detective type James Bond, the one that feels like this is the role model for the era that he's in. I think the only thing preventing Dr. No from being in my top 10 is that the villain is just thrown in there at the end. Well, they sort of build up to him, but you don't really see him until the very end of the movie. The plan for the villain is a little bit too vague, and it's one of those villainous plans that you can't quite visualize or grasp, or at least in my opinion you can't. And it's really lacking, I think. The Bond girl is also thrown in there at the very end of the movie, and her role is iconic, that's for sure. And she has a really good backstory, but it's not utilized to its best capabilities. Like, it's weird too. She talks about how she eventually killed her ex-husband because he was abusive or something like that, and how she killed him by a poisonous spider or some sort of poison. And yet when Sean Connery kills a minion, just a henchman, she's like so upset that he killed her right in front of her eyes. And so it's like, oh, really? You poisoned your ex-lover, and you're upset because Sean Connery killed that guy? I don't know, there's a few things in Dr. No that feel a little bit off, while other things are absolutely excellent. And yes, I consider it one of the best classic James Bond films of all time. But for me, entertainment-wise, I would put it at 15 in my top 15 Bond films. So number 14 is a Roger Moore film, and it is The Spy Who Loved Me. And to be honest, this is one of the higher class, one of the better crafted Roger Moore films. I think this one and For Your Eyes Only are the ones that really stand apart from other Roger Moore films. But yeah, there's something a bit sort of about both of those films. They don't feel as entertaining as the other Roger Moore films. For The Spy Who Loved Me, it is the first time you see Jaws, and he's really intimidating while still being funny in key moments. And I really love the introduction of Jaws in this film. A really nice idea is the Bond girl being a spy for the Soviets. They have to work together, and yeah, she's like the equivalent of James Bond for the Soviets, down to even sleeping with other people. And the backstory that James Bond ultimately killed the person that she's in love with is a really great fuel for some sort of revenge by the end of the film. But then it's just really sort of left out or almost forgotten about because she sort of falls in love with him, but there's no real connection and there's no real build up to her falling in love with James Bond. I think the villain is a really big disappointment in this film because it's a very similar plan to Moonraker, except he wants to live under the sea while Moonraker is in space. Yeah, it's pretty damn similar. Except I think the villain for Moonraker was better because he was over the top and really fun and entertaining to watch. Plus, I have to give credit to Spy Who Loved Me because there's this one moment where Roger Moore actually gives a really good performance, and that's when the Soviet spy is talking about all the things she knows about James Bond, listing off all these things, and he mentions his wife and how he was married to one. And Roger Moore really changes his mood in there. He just becomes really angry and depressed, and he's like, all right, that's enough. And it shows that he has a lot more range than you would think. So number 13 is a Pierce Brosnan movie, one of the ones I almost always forget about, Tomorrow Never Dies. Yeah, for some reason I really enjoy it, but I forget about it, and then when I watch it again, I'm like, oh my god, why do I always forget about this one? It's really entertaining and fun. Wei Lin is an awesome Bond girl, and similar to The Spy Who Loved Me, is another spy, and I like her a lot more, that's for sure. Plus it's really nice seeing that it's May from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Really? That's awesome. I totally forgot about that. I really like the villain. I like his plan. It's very unique compared to the other James Bond films. But yeah, I really enjoyed Tomorrow Never Dies. I wish I would remember it more often, but for some reason that's one of the Bond films that I forget about. Number 12 is another Roger Moore film, and again, it's one of the movies that people think is top-notch and separate from the other Roger Moore movies. My number 12 is For Your Eyes Only. Yes, this one and Spy Who Loved Me is very different from the other Roger Moore films. It is a bit more serious, and there's a lot of craft involved in the making of the film. I love the twist that the villain isn't who you think it is. And out of the Bond girls that have a revenge story, this probably is one of the better, if not the best subplot of the James Bond films. So this particular Bond girl, yeah, her parents died right in front of her, she's out for revenge, and to be honest, this is one of the few ones that come full circle by the end of the film. Now, unlike a lot of Roger Moore and a lot of Sean Connery films, this one doesn't have a big shootout at the end of the film. Instead, this has a really good, really suspenseful moment that I didn't think Roger Moore films could achieve. The mountain climbing moment at the end of the film where he's hanging and this henchman is slowly hammering away the things that are anchoring him into the side of the mountain is really intense and it's really damn good. I was completely surprised rewatching the film because I had totally forgotten about it, and I forgot that it was that good and that excellently made. Pretty much that scene alone guarantees that it's in the top 15 spot. So number 11 is another Roger Moore film, and it's just not enough to be in my top 10. It is Live and Let Die. Live and Let Die is a very entertaining movie for me, and it's a bit of a blaxploitation movie in a way. And it's very odd for a James Bond film to be like that, but in a way it is. It has voodoo magic in it, and it's a little off-putting and a little weird for a James Bond film, but it totally works for the type of genre this particular movie is going for. I love rewatching it and realizing that the villain was in frickin' Alien. Yeah, he was Carter in Alien, the only black guy. That's who the villain is in Live and Let Die. Plus, I have to say, Live and Let Die is one of the best James Bond songs of all time. It has to be one of the best for sure. Come on, Paul McCartney. But then again, when a James Bond song is more of the rock genre, I have an affinity for it. Plus, I think there's a lot of parallels to this one and Dr. No, honestly. I think Dr. No has a few similarities that Live and Let Die has, or vice versa. My number 10 is a movie that I'm surprised is actually this low. I thought it would be higher, but then I rewatched it, and yeah, I do have some issues with it. Number 10 is Living Daylights. The Living Daylights is the first Timothy Dalton film, and it's a really good, excellent film. It showcased just how Timothy Dalton could be the loose cannon James Bond, how he's off on his own while other people are saying, no, you can't do this, and James Bond's like, screw it, I'm James Bond. While still being that suave and charming character and still having a little bit of coldness and a little bit more like an assassin. There's a lot of great action, and yes, it's top-notch compared to the other previous James Bond films. And I have to say, the airplane sequence is one of my favorite and most memorable scenes from a James Bond film. And it really feels like Naughty Dog got inspiration of that with Uncharted 3. Do you remember that sequence? It reminds me of The Living Daylights. I think the only thing about The Living Daylights that I don't like as much is the ending felt a little bit slower, and It felt a little out of place with them being in Iraq or somewhere in the Middle East. And the Bond girl becomes a little bit too annoying by the end of the film. Like, she's really good throughout the film, but then at the end, it's just she gets sort of annoying and in the way of things. Number 9 is another Pierce Brosnan movie, and it is The World Is Not Enough. This movie could have been amazing and could have been one of my top 5 James Bond films of all time if it wasn't for a few different things. For one, the acting is really odd in this movie. There are times when actors actually give a really great performance, while there's other times where those same actors feel like they're wooden and robotic and aren't really doing the film justice. There are some actors that are very consistent throughout, like Pierce Brosnan and Judi Dench. But other people, like the actress that plays Elektra, can sometimes be really amazing, while other times be very emotionless and just sort of eh. I love that the actor playing Renard is actually the guy from Once Upon a Time. He's Rumpelstiltskin. He's Rumpel-frickin-Stiltskin, and that's pretty damn amazing. I love that it's a villain that really can't feel any pain. He's slowly dying, and honestly, the main villain is actually Elektra King. She dies before Renard, but Elektra King is basically the main villain of the film because she's manipulating Renard. That's freaking amazing. No other James Bond film has had the main villain play a female. No other James Bond film. There's been female villains, but ultimately they've been henchmen. Elektra King is the only main villain of a James Bond film that's female. The overall story is really amazing as well. It's just a bummer that certain things just keep it from being absolutely great. Like the script, and the dialogue, and some of the acting, and the Bond girl in this one. Now, listen, I don't have any issue. I don't feel like she's really bad, but she's really out of place in this movie and doesn't feel like a nuclear scientist. Maybe I really still admire this film because I did play the video game for the N64 and I really liked it. Yeah, maybe that's why, but ultimately I think this is a really great James Bond film that has a lot of potential that is just squandered because of certain aspects. I love also that this is the first James Bond film where M is actually captured and M actually does stuff. This isn't the only James Bond film to do it, but it is the first. Number 8, I'm not going to talk about too much because I just did the review for it. My number 8 is Spectre. Alright, my number 7 is going to get a lot of hate. People are going to probably dislike this video just because this is so freaking high. Because this is ultimately what many fans consider the absolute worst James Bond film of all time. But I have to admit it, it is my number 7 favorite Bond film of all time. It is A View to a Kill. And ultimately, it's my favorite Roger Moore film. Listen, I really don't understand the hate that this film gets. Roger Moore is actually still really good despite his age, and honestly, if I wouldn't have found out his actual age, I wouldn't have thought too much about it. And he still doesn't feel too old to me. And maybe that's because I watched all these films very close together in order, and so I saw this slow progression of his age and didn't feel like he was too old once I actually saw it. Christopher Walken is a really great villain and one of the best villains, honestly. And yeah, he's not overacting like you expect Christopher Walken to be, so maybe people hate him for not going that length, kind of like how some people are feeling that Christoph Waltz is a disappointment. And Mayday is a really great henchman. She's really freaking amazing. She's intimidating. She's almost like an Amazon woman. She's really damn good. Even the relationship between our main villain and Mayday is really good. And yes, the backstory is pretty unique for the Bond villain. Plus, the song for this movie is really damn good. And when it kicks in throughout the action sequences, it's pretty damn epic and very 80s. Even though the main plan very much resembles Goldfinger, and some of the structure feels like Goldfinger, it still has a uniqueness to it that I really love. In fact, the only thing keeping this film from getting 5 stars from me is a few things. One, the snowboarding at the very beginning of the movie that has everyone surfing in the USA song or whatever, something like that. That is really weird and wacky and just like, really? The Bond girl in this film, while given a really good backstory, is kind of useless in this film. And every so often when a guy falls from a really long height in this movie, right before they hit the ground or they hit the water, you see that their arms and limbs just become extra long. It's almost like if they had just cut away a little bit sooner, there wouldn't have been those really long-armed beings, like dummies. Other than that, I really enjoy A View to a Kill, and I don't understand why there's so much damn hate for it. My number 6 is one of the best classic Sean Connery James Bond films of all time. My number 6 is From Russia with Love. This is a really good espionage spy stuff. It really feels more spy-like. That's the thing about the Sean Connery ones. They feel a little bit more like spies. They feel a little bit more like detective stuff. And From Russia with Love is a really good showcase for that. This makes the film a little bit slower than most other James Bond action-type films, but it's a really good crafted film. It's the first film with Spectre involvement, and it's really handled nicely. The Bond girl in this film is just being manipulated by Spectre, and I love that she ends up killing the one villainous girl at the end of the movie. Even though the Bond girl is pretty useless towards the end of the movie, where she's pretty much passed out for a long moment of the ending. And the assassin in this movie played none other than Quint from Jaws. Yeah, Quint from Jaws is the villain in this movie. And he's not the main villain. He's actually just an assassin, a hired gun. But he almost feels like the main villain of the movie. That's how good he is. And the train fight sequence is amazing. I have a lot of love for From Russia with Love, and the only reason that it's not quite 5 stars for me is the ending feels a little too long. It feels like there's separate endings in the movie, almost like, okay, we got done with this, but oh, you're still going? Well, maybe after you succeed from this, then you can just, oh no, oh, we're still going. There's still more to the movie. It feels like there's separate endings in this film, kind of like Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, and Mockingjay Part 2. It feels along those lines with the ending.